Hey, what is up guys? So we are going to be doing an awesome budget deck profile. This is TG Stun, and it's a really easy deck to kind of understand how to play, but it's going to take a lot of practice to fully understand when to actually make these large pushes. So let's go ahead and jump right into the deck profile. I'll be explaining some of the choices as well as some of the small things that you can do in this deck. I do also want to mention that the side deck over here is not the actual side deck. What this is cards that if you actually want to replace some of these cards with, or you simply don't have, you can swap them in and out. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. This is actually similar to Marquise Henderson's build. He actually got first place at a YCS a while ago. This is back when Trishula and also Tengu were still legal. Well, Tengu is actually legal at 2, but this was back when Tengu was at 3. Anyways, let's go ahead and jump right into the deck profile. So, first off, we have one BLS. BLS is a fantastic card, and now that it is a budget card, and it's really easy to get because those tins are coming out in just one more day, you can have access to one of the most powerful Chaos monsters in the game. Next up, we have 3 Beast King Barbaros. Because we play triple skill drain, we are going to be locking our opponent out of, making any moves, because once you get a skill drain and a Beast King, there is very few things decks can do unless they have a mystical space typhoon. Also, one thing I want to mention with this deck, if you open it with Beast King first turn, always summon Beast King. Unless you have Thunder King, summon Beast King first turn, set everything. They will always expect a skill drain. And what usually good players do once they see Beast King, they're like, okay, I'm not going to blind space typhoon things. I'm going to wait until I see the skill drain. I'll chain MST to the skill drain. And simply, sometimes you can win because if you activate Bottomlesses and Deep Prisons and Mirror Forces, by the time they're able to actually use their MST, they've already lost because, they didn't hit your Deep Prison, they didn't hit the Mirror Force or something like that, and your Beast King is going to sit there, and you might not even have skill drain. You could simply just win. So keep that in mind as well. The mind games with Beast King and skill drain are so high. Next up, we have one Thunder King because it's a light. It works with BLS. Plus, he's just a fantastic stun card in general. Also, there's certain decks that just simply lose to this. Like windups, they just lose to this card, and it's an excellent card. It's only at 1. You might as well play it right now because maybe it'll get banned eventually. Next up, we have triple TG Rush Rhino. He's basically the card you usually want to go to just to run over things. And what's awesome with this deck, you can actually increase some of the attack even higher with some of the cards like Horn of the Phantom Beast, which we will talk about later on. But pretty much anything that's Beast or Beast Warrior, what you're able to do is you're able to increase their attack by 800 plus when it destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard. You get to draw a card, so that's pretty awesome. Not only do you get to damage stuff, activate something that you get to run over their monster, but you also get to draw a card. Significant advantage in the game with that. Plus, he already gets another 400 boost. Next up, triple Photon Saber Tiger. It's just a fantastic card in TG Skill Drain, simply because it allows you to start adding your cards. And then once they attack, you go skill drain. It's a 2,000 beater, plus it lets you search out, and it's a light, and it works with Horn of the Phantom Beast. I'm like, that's too good. If Reborn Tengu was actually at 3, I'd probably swap this out, drop the BLS. But since Tengu is only at 2, this card is awesome. I like this card because it also allows you to XYZ in the deck a little bit easier. Because if this gets protected, you can summon another one. And then they're 2,000 beaters, and if your opponent is playing a certain deck where, you need to make something like a Levier sometimes to get back one of your banished cards. Like, getting back a banished Thunder King is excellent sometimes. So you'll have access to, like, a Levier, or maybe it's, say, like, a Tempo if you know that they happen to run an XYZ deck that needs both of the materials to actually be successfully good. Next up, 3 TG Warwolf. He's good because he's dark, plus, he's able to be special summoned. I also do want to mention that he can be special summoned when your opponent special summons a level 4 lower monster. It's not only when you special summon, so that is pretty awesome. It allows you to do a lot of plays and protect yourself sometimes from getting OTK'd. Next up, we have TG Striker. Now that it's at 2, TGs are actually a viable deck. This card is one of the best tuners that TGs have. They actually have another tuner. No one really knows about this guy, but we'll talk about him later. But TG Striker, very good card. It's basically if your opponent has a monster and you don't, you just special summon this guy, and then you can special summon a Werewolf, and then you can normal summon a TG Rush Rhino. And what that allows you to do is push for something like Mistworm. Unfortunately, Trishula is not legal now, but maybe in the future when it comes back, if it ever does, you'll have access to that. But sometimes you can make a Mistworm and just game them. If you happen to have a Dark Bribe set or a Forbidden Lance, or if your opponent doesn't happen to have any back row or an effect failure, you can just simply just push for game. But you have to, get a lot of practice in, like I said, with this deck. It's going to take a little bit more practice to actually get good at. It does look really easy to play, but you're going to need to know when to actually make these large pushes. Next up for the spells, we got one Creature Swap. I think Creature Swap is a fantastic card, simply because there is actually a TG Creature Swap, which we will talk about later, but Photon Saber Tiger is an excellent card to just give to your opponent. You summon it, and you get a free plus, and then you Creature Swap, maybe take their awesome, Judgment Dragon, or, a really good card, and they will be very really sad because Photon Saber Tiger for them is probably not going to be so good, and you're probably going to be able to run over it with whatever monster that you traded with Creature Swap. Next up, we have Dark Hull. I do want to mention that TGs get their effects whenever they are sent to the graveyard, but that does not actually include when they are synchro summoned or if you XYZ with them, so keep that in mind as well. Next up, 3-Pot of Duality, because very rarely will you be special summoning in this deck, and majority of the time it's just like a striker anyways, and you pretty much only summon like, some of these boss monsters once in a while, or if you have this card plus this card is pretty good. But this gets special summon attack position, it becomes 3,000 anyway, so you don't really have to worry too much about that. But Duality is a fantastic card in this deck. And I opt to actually play no Mystical Space Typhoon. If you want to, you can definitely throw it in, but majority of the time, you don't really care what happens to your monsters, other than like BLS. That's the only monster I care about. But if they're going to Torrential or going to Mirror Force, you're going to go plus anyways. Like, it doesn't matter. You've already netted some type of advantage anyways in the game. And you can also chain things to their activation of, Torrential Tribute or something like, Bottomless. If they Bottomless your Rush Rhino, you can chain something like TG 1 EM1, TG1 EM1, and then you can actually swap the monsters, and then, basically they just lost out their monster. It's pretty awesome. So I don't feel like you need MST in this deck, but if you want to, you can definitely maybe swap out a Lance or swap whatever card you don't actually like that I'm actually showing you guys. But like I said, this is actually a deck profile that's very similar to a guy that topped and got first place out of YCS. Next up, 2 Horn of the Phantom Beast. Fantastic card. This card plus Beast King equals pretty much GG after you have Skill Drain. There's very few things that can deal with that. But basically what it does is, like I said, I think I mentioned earlier when I said it makes the monster gain 800 attack plus, when it destroys a monster by battle, and send it to the graveyard, you get to draw a card. I mean, a lot of the monsters don't have very much attack, but, sometimes if they happen to summon like an 1800 attacker or whatever, it does work with this to become 2000. This also becomes 2000, unless you already have another Photon Saber Tiger, and then it becomes 2800. This will be pretty strong as well when it attacks. It'll be 28, and most importantly, with Beast King 3800 attacks. So good. But if you want to, you can definitely opt to play 3, which we'll talk about later, but like I said, with Photon Saber Tiger, sometimes it's just not enough attack, unfortunately, but it's still a good card. Next up, 1 Bottomless because it's that 1. 2 Mirror Force, 1 Torrential Tribute, 2 Depression because you're all about, controlling and stunning your opponent. You're not letting them really do what they want to do. And every time your monster gets destroyed, no worries, you get more monsters back. Next up, 2 TG, 1 EM1, basically TG Creature Swap in Trap form. Probably one of the best cards. I love this card, chaining it to when my opponent goes for your Judgment Dragon, activates Judgment Dragon's effect to blow up the field. I train this card, I give him a TG, they pay 1,000 life points, and now I have Judgment Dragon, they get my TG, and it gets blown up anyways, because Judgment Dragon activated its effect. Now I have a Judgment Dragon, and at the end phase, I get to still search out for whatever TG that I want to search out for. Obviously, you can't search out the same one with itself. But this card is just fantastic. Don't just activate this. Wait till your opponent gets out something bigger that, you'd want, and then you just be like, okay, I'll trade you. It's like a creature swap that you get to choose what you want. It's so awesome. Next up, 1 Compulse. Something because if your opponent happens to get out something too strong that even with Skill Drain and Horn of the Phantom Beast, if the off chance, it happens, you can definitely make use of Compulse. Plus, Compulse is, like, always live anyway. And next up, to round it off with the best stun card ever, Skill Drain. This card just hurts. Sometimes people just quit. I've played a few games of TGs where, they go set a whole bunch of back row, and then, you flip up like a Skill Drain, and then you summon a Beast King, and if they don't have a response to that, or maybe they do, you Lance, and then it's pretty much game over. Like, that thing is very dirty to run into. Next up, Call of the Haunted. You can opt to not play this if you want to, but I like it as a chainable to get back a TG if they, Blind Space Typhoon. Good players won't blind Space Typhoon TGs, but if it does happen, you can chain it, grab back TG, and get its effect during the end phase. Also, getting back Beast King is good, getting back Thunder King is good, and you can still get back a BLS, so that's pretty awesome. Next up, 2 Dark Bribe. You gotta protect the Skill Drain. You could play 3 if you really want to, but the thing with Dark Bribe is it's actually kind of a card where it's supposed to be bad. Like, when you activate it, your opponent gets advantage because you've used a card and they still maintain the same amount of cards in hand. However, when you have Skill Drain and Beast King out, it doesn't matter how many cards that they have, unless they have Heavy Storm, which they can't. But pretty much the only thing that sucks is if they, you Dark Bribe to protect, Skill Drain from an MSC and they draw another MSC. That's the only thing that sucks sometimes. Because I remember, one time someone Dark Bribed when I was playing E-Heroes, I went E-Call, he Dark Bribed, and then I drew Reinforcement of the Army, and I searched that out anyway. So keep in mind, sometimes Dark Bribe, it can, be a bad card to use, but basically what you want to use it for is to protect Skill Drain. Also, there are times where you can make huge plays, like maybe a Mistwar, maybe you need to go for a Black Rose. You need to get rid of, the field. You can definitely make use of going for like a Black Rose, and maybe your opponent, committed so much to the field to where if you, got a Black Rose, Dark Bribe, that's game, pretty much. You have too much advantage. Maybe you can drop a BLS and then set all your back row. And then last off, we have the Solemn Warning because it's at 1. It's a pretty fantastic card. Let's go ahead and go over some of the extra deck cards. I'll briefly go over some of the ones you might not be familiar with. This card is awesome. Play this card. I love the card. It's my new favorite, level 6 Synchro. Also, don't cut Orient Dragon. This card is awesome because, a lot of players are playing a lot more decks that can actually utilize Synchro monsters. So this is a fantastic card, just banish Synchro monster and, attack directly, basically. Next up, don't forget this card. This card is pretty good too. Catastor is pretty awesome. It's also getting a reprint. This card is probably the most important card in your extra deck. Do not skip out on this card. It's very important. Simply because in games 2 and 3, your opponent will almost always side deck Royal Decree against TG Stun, or any type of deck that just likes to throw out Skill Drain or just stun you. That runs heavy amounts of traps, and this is a deck that does run heavy traps. So what TG Wonder Magician does is it destroys a spell or trap card, and then once it's destroyed, you get to draw a card. So you don't really go minus with this card, but what it comes down to its effect is basically destroy Royal Decree, and then once this card dies, because it's only 1900 attack, not so great in that aspect. But I do also want to mention that it is also a tuner. It's one of those Synchro tuner monsters, so maybe you could actually, Synchro up later on and go for something else. Next up, Crazy Box, just because it works with Skill Drain. Also, Acid Golem is an awesome card if you want to throw it in here, but I generally like Zen Mains, but, if you have Skill Drain, what's the point of going for Zen Mains? Gemini Pearl, Popular Operative, Jin. This card's awesome. It's a stun card, but you don't have to play it. I know this card's not really necessarily a budget card for some players. Next up, Levier. This card's pretty awesome. Getting back some of your TGs, or getting back Thunder King, more importantly. It's such a good card to get back, because it does stun by itself. Next thing, Tempo and a Zen Mains. So let's go over some of the cards. If you don't have some of these cards, or you might not like, maybe, for example, you don't like Forbidden Lance or something like that, you can definitely play some of these other cards. And any Skill Drain stun deck, Cyber Dragon is a fantastic card. It's got decent amount of attack, and it's special summonable. Plus it's light, you can utilize it with BLS. Next up, Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. This card is pretty awesome because it's a stun card by itself, and it's not a bad card at all. Plus, this card plus Lance, it can do some work sometimes. Next up, TG Cyber Magician. This is a card that no one really plays, but maybe if you really want to play BLS and you don't happen to have Photon Saber Tigers, you can throw on this card instead. Basically, what it comes down to is he has the effect of, it's sent to the graveyard, you can add 1 TG monster except for himself. But he is a light, plus he is a tuner, so if you want to actually use 1-for-1, you could actually utilize 1-for-1. But if you are going to be playing 1-for-1, I do recommend you to get some practice in with this deck, because 1-for-1 is a fantastic card. It can definitely win you games, but there are times where if you activate it too early, you can simply just lose. Next up, this card's not bad at all, Dire Force of the Earth, but I like this card. He's my new favorite card. Next up, TG Power Gladiator. This card is pretty decent, but I never really make this card. It's basically a 2300 attacker that's piercing, and then when it's destroyed, you get to draw a card. Next up, the Sun Dragon. Not a bad card at all. I mean, you might be able to make it sometimes, maybe with like 2 Beast King, but you don't really need it. I figured I'd just mention it just because sometimes if you need to pop something, like, for example, that card, Messenger of Peace, that's a card. That card, and some Inzektor players play that card. That card, it's like, what do you do? Because, like I said, since I'm not playing the MSCs, it can be difficult, but there's always this card, so you don't really need it, like I said, but, I just figured I'd mention it. Next up, Mind Control, because there's a lot of 4s, there's a lot of 3s, and there's also tuners in the deck, so generally, 2, 3s, and 4s are what, really utilize Mind Control with when you take your opponent's monster and synchro up with it. Next up, Mystical Space Typhoon. If you want to play this, by all means, you can play it, but like I said, most of the time, you don't care about your stuff. When they Torrential you, when they Mirror Force you, you're going to get stuff at the end phase, so it doesn't really matter. You're going to maintain advantage. Next up, there's also a Pot of Avarice for TGs. You select 3 monsters that are TGs in your graveyard, and then you get to draw 2 cards. Not bad at all. It is a nice Chinable card. Next up, if you want to play more Horn of the Phantom Beast, excellent card, but sometimes this card just doesn't have the amount of attack that you need. But it's really good at Beast King, though. Next up, Pinpoint Guard. Now this card's pretty awesome because you can get back a TG, prevents you from getting OTK'd, and then next turn you can actually, make a Synchro or a XYZ, whatever you need to make. Next up, Phoenix Wing Wind Blast. Because TGs is a stun deck, this card can stun your opponent pretty hard sometimes. Simply if they get out, they finally get out their big monster that they're going to do something with, and you're like, nope, put it back to the top deck, and then they'll be very sad. Next up, Safe Zone, pretty decent card. I really like this card as a chainable when my opponent activates a Space Typhoon and you chain it and you target their monster and then just lose their monster. It's awesome. Next up, Phoenix Chain, excellent card. Pretty self-explanatory, it does its job. Next up, Dark Bribe. If you want to max out on Dark Bribes, you can definitely do so. I don't recommend playing cards like Magic Jammer, but you do definitely need to protect the skill drain, because protecting skill drain equals you win the game. This is really what it comes down to. But yeah, Dark Bribe is kind of a bad card sometimes. You gotta keep that in mind as well. But anyways, I will also be uploading the deck profile, or I'm sorry, the deck download for this deck. If you want to download it on DevPro, I'll leave a link down below in the description box. I'm doing some of these deck profiles on Dueling Network. I'm doing some of them on DevPro simply because I know some players prefer it on Dueling Network, and I know some players prefer it on DevPro, and I figure, you know, I'll try to cater towards both of you guys by uploading, you know, half and half, kind of. But the thing with DevPro, which is pretty awesome, is you can actually just download the deck profile. I'll also leave a tutorial link if you don't know how to actually download the decks and install them onto your DevPro program, so you can actually, you know, you don't have to actually add the cards manually. But let me know what deck profile you guys want next for the next budget decks, because this is actually one of my favorite budget decks. It's pretty easy to understand how to play. It just takes a few you know, games to actually understand when to actually make those big pushes in the deck. But anyways, thanks for watching. Have a great day, guys. Asian Eyes signing out.